So I found these shutters actually on the side of the road. Someone down the street from me is cleaning out their house, getting ready to sell it, and has been putting a bunch of stuff out on the curb for free. So I scooped these up and I actually got 2 sets of them. I only want to use half of one of the sets of shutters. So taking my screwdriver, I just took the hinges off so that I could separate these out. Then I took my crud cutter because this thing was absolutely filthy and gave it a really good cleaning. Once it was all clean, I just took my palm sander. There were several layers of built up built up paint over the years. So I at least wanted to sand it down to a smooth surface. And then taking this heirloom white satin Rust-Oleum spray paint, I gave it 2 good coats. Next comes the fun part. So I got this Queen Bee decoupage paper from the Farmhouse Market Etsy shop. I will link that in my description box below, but I wanted to try a different method of decoupage that I've never done before, and that is the iron-on method. So what you want to do here is take your Mod Podge, cover your whole surface with a good coat of the Mod Podge, and then you want to let it dry. So once I laid my Mod Podge down, I let that dry completely, and then taking my iron with no steam, I'm going over all of the flat surfaces of my shutter with that decoupage paper laid down on top. You want to make sure that you have some wax paper laid down in between your iron and your decoupage paper so that you don't burn the surface. And I did get a little rip there, but that's okay. In the end, you can't even tell. Now to get the shutter parts, my iron was not going to fit on all of these. It wasn't a flat, smooth surface. So I just took my X-Acto knife and started cutting slits all through my decoupage paper so that I would have little strips that I could then seal down. And the way I did this was just taking my heat gun and I heated up that glue the same way you would have done with an iron, and then just took this little, this is actually like it came with my Mod Podge like roller, so I assume it is for like decoupaging and smoothing out your paper or whatever material you are using. I did end up burning or like melting this thing a little bit because it's not silicone, it is rubber, so you want to be careful there. The heat gun gets really hot, but this ended up working out really well. So I just continued to do that all the way along my shutter, and including these little detail lines that were on the outside little part of my movable shutter pieces. I have no idea what you would call those things, but you know what I'm talking about. So once I got all of my paper attached, I just took a 220 grit sandpaper and started sanding down the edges, just making sure to sand down and away from my paper so that I didn't lift up anything that I didn't want to. I was going for a rustic look with this piece, so I did also take some sandpaper and rough up all of the little individual shutter pieces along with all of the edges. And for this one, I took a 100 grit sandpaper just to make it a little rougher. Next up, I am taking some antique Waverly wax and just going over the entire piece. I know we spray painted this in the beginning, and we're kind of just covering all of that up, but I did want to have a nice, clean, smooth surface to start with, and then taking my wax and just adding in all of that aging detail everywhere that the paint is showing. Once I was happy with the distressing, I just grabbed my hinges, attached the 2 sides of the shutters back together, and I did end up distressing the hinges with some antique Waverly wax as well. And that was it for this piece. It really was not too difficult to do, and I really did enjoy the heat transfer or iron-on method of doing decoupage. I will definitely use this method again in the future. I have this vase I also found at the Goodwill for $4.99. It is huge and it is very heavy. So after I got it home and started taking the stickers off, I realized there was another one on the bottom, the original sticker. It was from Kohl's and originally $40. So I definitely got a good deal on this. I'm going to start out by cleaning this piece with my crud cutter. I don't always show it, but just know that I do clean my pieces when I bring them home from the thrift store to get off any of that disgusting bacteria, grossness, whatever is all over this piece. Once I had it all clean, I'm taking my Rust-Oleum chalk paint in linen white, and I'm going to start painting this, and I'm painting in all different directions. I want this to be very messy. So I want to give it like a slight texture, but I don't want to do like the whole baking soda or adding anything to the paint. I'm just going to give it a very slight texture by going in all different directions, giving it 3 separate layers of white paint. I might have given it 4. After I added my layers of white paint, then I took a sponge that I just got in a pack from the clearance section at Michael's, cut it up into some smaller pieces, and I'm going to start dabbing on some various tones of brown. So this first shade that I'm starting with is called Classic Caramel, however you want to pronounce it, by Apple Barrel. And one of the mistakes that I made here was using the dry sponge. So I do get smarter here in a little bit, but not quite yet. So this next color that I'm taking is Territorial Beige by Apple Barrel, and I'm just going to start layering and trying to blend the 2 colors together. Since I have the dry sponge though, it's not working as well as I had hoped. So once I realize I need to wet the sponge, I do end up going back over all of my colors and it blends a lot better. So learn from my mistakes and use a wet sponge to start with. So the third color that I'm taking is called Coffee Bean, and this one is from Folk Art. So this is just a little bit of a deeper brown. So I'm going for a gradient effect here on my piece. Once I have all of those colors laid down, I do just take a tiny bit of black to richen up the very bottom of this, because you can kind of see like I have the colors not only like going in a gradient, but they're kind of like thicker and thinner in some areas as well. So here's where I got smart and wet my sponges, and then I did go back over all of my colors, adding them a little bit more and blending them together with my wet sponge, and that just made it look a lot more like a gradient effect. So you can see that here, how much better it looks. Once I got to the top, I wanted it to have more of a seamless transition instead of like that stippling look. So I just added some more of my white paint and then a dry brush, and I just kept going back and forth until I made it look a little bit more effortless. And that was it for this piece. I really love this grouping that I put together inside of my entryway. I think the mirror behind it just really elevates this table and makes it look a little more high end. And like I bought all of these pieces from the store. 2 of these I made. Everything was thrifted other than the mirror that actually was part of my bathroom vanity that I didn't want in the bathroom.
Found this salad bowl set. I shared it a few months ago in a haul, but knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. I paid $8 for this set, and I'm going to show you 2 ways to make a trendy planter just in case you can't find stackable salad bowls. I wanted to cut the bottom out of 3 of the 5 bowls. This isn't necessary if you just want to put a fake plant or succulents in here, but just to have the option for a larger plant, I did cut them out. And to do that, I used my Dremel. I bought this router guide attachment, which honestly I don't think it helped at all, but definitely could have been user error. Next, I glued 3 bowls together and then 2 bowls together for a set using my E6000 glue and let that dry overnight. There were a few gaps around where the bowls meet, so I used caulk to fill them in and make this look like one piece. To get the caulk smooth, wet your finger and wipe it across the seam. Less is definitely more here. Once the caulk was dry, I gave the bowl a scuff sand and then a coat of slick stick These bowls look like a mahogany or a very red type of wood, and I didn't want there to be bleed through. That would have caused a lot of extra work. And then I painted the planters with 2 coats of Sandcastle by Dixie Belle. The inside where I cut the bowls was pretty jagged. I should have sanded this down sooner, but I just took my Dremel with a sanding disc to smooth it out. I've been finding a lot of uses for this Dremel tool lately, and I highly recommend you have one in your arsenal. The last step for this version is to spray a coat of textured spray paint for a little more detail with this Rust-Oleum stone spray paint in bleached stone. For this project, I found this flagstone slate looking piece at one of my local thrift stores. It was $7.99, which was kind of on the pricey side, but I thought it was really unique and I could find something really cool to do with it. I also found this jacket at my local Goodwill, and again, I loved the texture and I just knew I could do something cool with it. So I picked that up as well, and I'm gonna start cutting it down to fit in the center of my slate piece. And I actually found this idea from Julie's Designs and Signs. She did something very similar recently. I will link her video in my description box, where she cut out, it was either burlap or drop cloth fabric that she used and stamped it. And I just thought it was so cool. So I wanted to do something similar with a bit more of a modern take. So now I'm going to take you guys through how I use my Cricut design space. I know several of you have been asking for a tutorial on how I use this. So I opened up my Cricut design space and I clicked on New Project. And then I clicked on the image button on the left-hand side. And there are tons of preloaded images that you can find on the Cricut design space. I do pay for Cricut Access, so anything with that A there, I do have access to and pay a monthly subscription for. But for this piece, I wanted to find some type of like greenery stem. So I just typed in the word stem and I'm scrolling through all of the images that pop up until I find something that I like. And I really love this simple, modern looking greenery piece. So I clicked on that and then hit insert onto my project, and it's gonna take me back to my project screen here. And I apologize, for some reason the record screen was not working on my computer, so I had to literally film with my phone, but you still get the idea. Next, I'm clicking on the shapes and I want to bring in a square. We're gonna change the size of this, so I unlock it down in that left-hand corner, and then I'm gonna change the width and the height to be the size of my black fabric piece that we cut out, so that I know how big I want this Cricut cutout to be and where it's going to sit on my fabric piece. Then I'm just bringing my image to the front. I just right clicked on it and hit bring to front so that it would be on top of my square here. And I'm going to enlarge it until I am happy with the way this looks and the way that it is going to sit on my fabric. Once I'm happy with the size of my greenery fern here, I'm just going to delete that square background. We don't actually want to print out that part of this image, only the greenery itself. And then I'm going to click up on the right-hand side there where it says Make It. Now it's going to bring us to this screen telling us how many mats this is separated into. This was a layered image, so it is separated onto 2 different mats with 2 different cuts. I was okay with that, and it tells me I need a 12 by 12 inch mat to cut out this piece. So I'm satisfied with that, and I click continue, and it's going to connect to my Cricut machine through the Bluetooth, and it's going to set my base material. So I have mine currently set at vinyl on. I have the Cricut Explore Air 2, which if you need to change the setting, you turn the knob on the machine itself. But mine is set to vinyl, so we are good to go. Now we go over to the Cricut. You can see the flashing arrows. It is telling me to feed my mat into my Cricut machine, and I hit the arrow to feed my mat. Now it's going to light up the little C button. We are going to press that, and that is going to cut out our vinyl. Now, if you have been following me for a while, you know that I love to use Dollar Tree contact paper anytime I am cutting out a stencil. I don't like to waste vinyl. I feel like vinyl is too expensive for that. But if you have stencil vinyl or you prefer to cut out actual vinyl when creating a stencil, by all means, do what makes you happy. When your cut is complete, you will see that arrow again flashing for you. You're going to press it. It is going to unload your mat, and then you can take it out of the machine and start weeding. This is such a satisfying part to me. I know other people love watching weeding or weeding themselves, and there are others who absolutely hate it and dread this process, but I actually think it is quite soothing and relaxing. Once I have my stencil out, again, I like to use cheap contact paper, clear contact paper as my transfer tape, and I'm just going to lay it down. I use actually the Target brand clear contact paper as my transfer tape, and then I start removing the backing, and this sometimes doesn't want to come up all the way. I just go slowly, push it back down, and then roll it to remove the backing of my contact paper. Once I have that removed, I am going to place it down on my fabric where I want this stencil to go, remove that clear contact paper, and then we are going to start adding the paint to our stencil. So since this was a layered image, it cut out the full greenery piece as one large section, and then there is a smaller section that kind of layers on top of it. So I wanted the bottom layer that was this full piece of greenery to be in the gray mineral color. And once I'm done stamping that, you'll see in a second here I have to add on that second layer, and then we're going to add the color there. And I do use my heat tool to dry my paint in between. I added 2 layers or 2 coats of my paint, removed the vinyl or the contact paper, and then moved on to my second layer. You can see me struggling here. It was really sticky, this contact paper. Normally I like de-stick it a little bit, stick it to my shirt, but I didn't do that this time, and it was really sticking to this fabric and did not want to come off. So now I need to add that second layer, and I'm just going to line it up as best as I can right over top of that first section, and I was okay if it kind of showed the gray underneath of it a little bit. I thought it would give a really cool like shadow effect almost, and then I'm taking my ivory colored chalk paint and stamping this one. Again, I gave it 2 coats of paint and dried it with my heat gun in between. Once my stencil was all finished, I'm going to take my Mod Podge and add this fabric to the slate. Now, I think I should have used a spray adhesive here instead of the Mod Podge. I didn't like how the Mod Podge turned my fabric more shiny. Even though this is a matte Mod Podge, it still does have a slight sheen to it. So if I were doing this again, I would definitely use a spray adhesive instead of the Mod Podge. But once it was dry, I just took some 2mm macrame cord, and I wanted to outline the raw edges to cover those up a little bit around the fabric. Hot glued that down, and that was it for this one. I absolutely love the way this turned out. I think it is super modern and minimal and just my style.
I have not upcycled before on my channel, but it's been sitting around in my garage for over a year now. I was inspired by this chair I saw on Pinterest and basically recreated it on a smaller scale. First, I removed the seat pieces of the stool. I need to sand those down so I can stain them using my espresso color for a rich look. Then I gave the rest of the stool 3 coats of white paint, just like the inspiration. Once the paint and stain were both dry, I printed out this flower from Cricut Design Space in 2 versions. One as a stencil and one as the regular cut image. Now I realized later I should have cut the regular image as just an outline of the shape. I didn't need the whole cut image, but didn't think about that initially. I only need the regular cut image so I know where to paint the white on the seat of the stool. That's why you only need the outline of it. It would have made it a lot easier to apply with the way this stool has slats of wood and is not solid. I cut the vinyl between the slats as well so the image would look like it wraps around each piece of wood, and then painted around the image with the white paint. Now I need to remove this vinyl and apply the second one I cut out. This one is going to create the stencil of the flower. Making sure it got lined up well was a little bit challenging. I also should have sealed the white paint before laying the stencil down. It ended up removing some of that white paint and I had to go back and touch it up. I'm using sage green paint here and a sponge dabber to apply the stencil and did 2 coats. When I removed the stencil, I wanted to try heating it up. I've seen people do that before to release the stickiness of the vinyl, but I actually think that made it worse here. And again, if I had sealed the white paint, I think it would have turned out much better. But you can see the paint pulled up in some spots. Once I got all the vinyl off and the paint touched up, I'm going to add some grain sack stripes using the same sage green color. This time I used masking tape and made sure to place it on my shirt sleeve first to remove some of that stick. I did not want to go back and touch up this paint again. I took the grain sack stripe onto the top of the stool and did both the front and back of it. That's it for this one. I think it turned out so beautiful and I love this technique of having the stain under the stencil. What do you guys think?
I have this little hexagon stool that I found at the Goodwill, and it is pretty dirty, pretty beat up, and it's not beat up, but it's pretty disgusting. The tag says $5.99. I paid $3 for it. I got it on a 50% off day. So the first thing I need to do is spray it down with my crud cutter, clean it really well because it was pretty dirty. Then I'm going to take it out into my garage and I'm going to use my palm sander to sand it down. Now, it looks like I'm going all the way down to bare wood. I don't do that around the whole thing, but there wasn't a whole lot to this piece. It seemed like it might have had a thin layer, maybe stain. It was probably just a protective sealer. So I just gave it a nice scuff sand.
So while I was sanding, I realized the top was just held on with these screws. So I just took it off so that I could get all the way around top, bottom, and then I noticed this little guy's missing. And I don't know if I did that or if it was like that. I thought I checked the whole piece before I bought it, but possibly missed something. So I think I'm just gonna pry all of these off. I can't really do it with one hand, but I think I'm just gonna take them all off and maybe fill in the holes. So we'll see about that. Still thinking on that little part. But then I also realized when the top was on, it was kind of wobbly. So these pieces, you can see there, they're just kind of sitting together. So I am going to take some wood glue, glue these down nice and secure so it doesn't wobble like that anymore.
So once I added in all of my wood filler, I was letting that dry and brought the top piece in to paint it with my Ivory color by Waverly. And I did paint the top and bottom of this piece with 2 coats. After my wood filler was dry, I just sanded that down to be flat, and you can see now that the top is nice and not wobbly anymore. You can't really see that, but it's not wobbly anymore. And I decided to paint this with a deep navy blue. Now, I mixed up this color. I used Apple Barrel True Navy and then ink, which is black by Waverly, because I wanted to be a very deep navy blue. And I love the color that this turned out. Blue is really popular in home decor this year, so I wanted to start making a few pieces with this color. I also started on the bottom of my stool and then worked my way to the top of it. Next, I'm taking these wall art stickers that I found at the dollar spot from Target. They were $5, I guess the bullseye spot, whatever you want to call it. They were $5. And I'm just gonna peel these little terrazzo pieces off and place them all over my stool. So I took the largest pieces first, placed those where I wanted, and then I filled in with the more medium and smaller pieces throughout. And I did make sure to wrap some pieces around the corners and get them on the sides, but I did not go under the stool. I didn't really think that part was necessary. But these are basically just really, really thin little stickers. And they're not navy. The dark ones are more black, but I thought because they were so like sheer almost, you really couldn't tell the difference between the black and the navy. So once I had everything placed where I wanted, I'm just taking some polyacrylic and I'm going to seal everything in. I like using polyacrylic because it's water-based, and using a white or light paint, it is not going to turn yellow over time. After the poly dried, I did go over it with a little bit of sandpaper, and this was a 220. I went very lightly, but you can kind of see it did like leave some little spots in my terrazzo looking stickers, and I was okay with it on the edges because I felt like it gave it a more like realistic look. But there are a few little spots that kind of threw it off, but that's okay. I still think this looks amazing. So now I just need to attach the bottom of my stool to the top of it, and it was really hard to fit my screw gun in there, but it worked out. And the last little detail I'm going to add is some little furniture tacks. So I just marked where I wanted to place those, held them on with my little pliers here, and then hammered them down. So I did pull them down a little bit from where those original dowels were, and I didn't put them on the bottom. I only put them on the top. But I thought this was a nice finishing detail to the piece, and they're like a bronze color. But that's it for this project. Let me know what you think. I think this looks so on trend and so cute for a thrift store find. Oh, I forgot to mention, I also did seal in the navy blue color with a just clear chalk paint wax. Next project, I'm taking this glass gallon jug that I got from the Goodwill several months ago, and I made it over in another DIY video a little while back. So I'll link that in the description box below, but I'm going to start out by removing all of the embellishments that I previously added to it. So then I'm taking these scraps that I had left over from a carpet rug gripper mat that I just put a new rug in my bedroom, and these were literally just the scraps left over that I cut off from where they were hanging out from the rug. And I'm going to place these in various spots all around my glass jar. So some of them I cut down thinner to be just like single strips, and I just started attaching these all over the jar wherever I thought it looked nice, and I used my E6000 to hold this in place. So I glued these all down in place on a Friday evening, came back to it Saturday morning, and it was good to go. So I didn't give it like a full 24 hours to dry, but it did have several hours. So there is no rhyme or reason to where I glued these pieces down, just wherever I thought it looked nice, and just created a unique pattern. And here is how it's looking with all of my rug gripper pad pieces all over the jar. So next I'm taking my ivory chalk paint and some baking soda mixture. Now I know everyone and their mother is doing this technique, but stick with me because this is not what we end up doing. So I do this part at first. I mix up my paint and baking soda and I start stippling it all over my jar. So I want that texture, and I want a lot of texture. So that's why I'm stippling this, even though if you were to just paint this on regularly, you will still get that texture from the baking soda. But here you can see, I know this is the first coat of paint. I do end up doing 2, but still wasn't happy with how the rug pieces were still looking like they were not part of the jar. And that's what I was going for. I wanted that cohesive look, like it was always meant to be there, and that's just how the jar was, or the vase, or whatever you want to call this thing. The vessel, I don't know. So next I'm taking some lightweight spackle from the Dollar Tree, and I mixed that with my paint. And here I'm just spreading it over the raised edges, and I'm kind of feathering it down and then taking my brush again and stippling over all of that to kind of blend it in. And this gave a much better effect and made those rug gripper pieces look like they were part of this vase. And that is what I was going for. So I did have to let this dry for quite a while because it was really thick on there, but here is how it's looking, and you absolutely could leave it just like this. I think it is simply beautiful and very modern boho, you know, whatever look you're going for. But I wanted to take it a step further and make it look aged. So I took various shades of browns that I had in my stash, and I will link all of the colors on the screen here so you know what I used. But I just took some chippy brushes, some sponge dabbers, went all over this vase in various spots because I really wanted those raised pieces to stick out the most, but I still wanted this piece to look like it was aged. However, I also wanted it to be light. So I still wanted it to be like a fairly white piece. So after I went in with all of my shades of browns, and I did throw in a little gray in there, then I took my ivory again and went over the entire piece to blend it all together. And I did this several times, back and forth with my browns, finish it off with my white until I was happy with the look. And I think this turned out not exactly how I had envisioned, but I still love that aged effect that I got. And this is how it turned out.
I have this beautiful basket. I believe I found this one at the Goodwill bins, and I had several ideas of what I wanted to do with it. I started out wanting to paint a green sack stripe on the top. I found another new color by Waverly at my Walmart called Sandstone. Does anyone else still have Waverly paint in their stores? I know so many content creators can no longer buy Waverly starting about a year ago, but my store has been coming out with new colors. I don't know why they're not consistent, but happy that I can still buy it. Anyways, after I painted 3 stripes on, I really didn't like it, so I did my best to remove the paint with water. I couldn't get into all the nooks and crannies, so I got what I could off and then took some watered down sandstone paint and brushed it over the entire basket to blend it in. Now I wanted to try printing on fabric and adding it to the basket. This was such an easy process. I took a piece of computer paper and this Gorilla adhesive spray, sprayed the paper, and then put a piece of canvas drop cloth on top of the paper. You want to make sure you smooth the fabric out really well so there's no wrinkles or lumps. Then I did a rough cut around the paper with scissors to cut off the excess fabric, but also went back in with my rotary blade to cut right along the edge of the paper. Then you can stick it into the printer and print out your design. I found this image on Etsy from a shop called Graphique. I did pay $1 for the digital download, and I'll link the shop in my description box if you're interested in this design, but this shop also has tons of beautiful graphics you can choose from. After my image was printed, I'm removing it from the paper, and the adhesive did not make the fabric sticky whatsoever. I definitely thought that it would, but then I cut it down to the size I wanted for the front of my basket. I pulled a few of the loose threads around the edges to add some more detail and an aged look, and then I hot glued the fabric onto the basket. Next, to give the whole basket an even more of an aged look, I took my DIY dark wax and brushed it all around the basket, including over the edges of the fabric. For a final detail, I'm adding these brass tacks to the corners. I did cut the tack piece off of the backs and just glued them down. That's it for this one. I added some lavender and love the way this looks. I'm taking this shadow box that I got from Hobby Lobby in their clearance section
Now, I know this is not a thrifted decor piece, so you will have to tell me if you think I'm cheating on this one, but I paid about $1 for it since it was after the summertime and this was part of their summer or spring collection. But I'm going to start out by removing that hanging hardware and then removing the staple so I can take the back piece out. I only want the frame for this project. And for the thrifted piece, I got this metal floral like statue or paperweight. I'm not really sure exactly what it's supposed to be, but I actually got it from a garage sale. I would consider that to still be a thrifted decor piece, and I think I paid $1 for this as well. But I'm going to start by removing the bottom stand of it, and it was just that felt circle on the bottom, and then it was bolted down in place. So I unscrewed the nut and then took that base off, because all I want is the metal floral piece, and we're gonna add this to the center, well, kind of off center inside of this shadow box frame. And I see these metal and wood decor pieces or like metal framed art pieces everywhere right now. They are super popular, so keep your eye out when you are thrift shopping for any of these beautiful metal pieces. Next, I'm going to find where I want to add the metal piece to my shadow box, and then I'm going to drill a hole. So I first drilled this hole completely all the way through the piece, and then I want it to sit flush, and I know I have to screw this back on with that bolt. So then I'm going to take a 1/2-inch spade bit and I'm going to drill from the outside in, and I only go in as far until that nut from the bolt is going to be hidden and you're not going to see it, so the bottom is going to be completely flush. Also guys, I got a new camera, so I've been playing around with the settings recently. So if you see some shots that look brighter, some that look a little bit darker, that is why I'm still trying to figure it out. Once I had my hole drilled, now I'm going to take some painter's tape and I'm going to cover off all of the wood pieces of this frame. I just want to paint the inside. I want to leave that wood there. I really love the tone of it. And then I'm just going to paint all of the orange and the pink parts with my ink black Waverly chalk paint. I did give it 2 coats of the paint. And then remove that painter's tape for the most satisfying reveal. I just love that part. Next, I'm just going to add in my metal floral piece, and the back of this shadow box has a little lip for where that original backing was, and this was the perfect size. It could not have fit more perfectly, but the very top of my rose just kind of sat inside of that little divot, so you can't see it from the front, but I was perfectly fine with that. I still love the way this turned out. I just added my bolt down on the bottom to secure it in place, and that was it for this one. Super easy and super trendy right now with the metal and wood. But what do you guys think?
I got this bread box. It was from the Goodwill for $4.99, and it just opens up. There is a little crack on the inside of it where the bottom of it would have been. Nothing that we can't fix. So I took it out to my garage, gave it a good scuff sand, and this image on it was actually like a raised image if you rubbed your hand across it. So I had to sand that part down really well, or else you would have seen it through the paint once we painted it. So to fix that little crack, I'm just using my medium Starbond glue along with an accelerator. This is not the Starbond accelerator, but it works just the same. So I'm just going to fill in this crack, and then I dropped my camera when spraying the accelerator, so I didn't get that part, but you just spray it on and it instantly hardens. Next, I took this lightweight spackle from the Dollar Tree just to smooth out those cracks so that it wouldn't still be visible. I took some 220 grit sandpaper, sanded that down, and then using my little handy dandy tabletop vacuum, cleaned that all up. And I will link him in my description box below. So to paint this, I am using my moss colored Waverly chalk paint. I did paint the entire outside and then the lid, both the inside and the outside of the lid in this color, giving it 2 coats. I did not paint the inside because we're going to do something different there. So I found this adhesive stencil vinyl at Michael's. It was on clearance, so I picked it up. I'd wanted to try something like this. I could tell as soon as I opened this, it was going to be a mistake. Like, just look at those wrinkles. I did try to smooth them out with my little, why can't I think of that? Like that little brayer tool scraper from Cricut. And I lifted it up off of the surface and tried to smooth it back down the best I could. My machine just ate this thing up. I didn't get a clip of that, but don't buy this stuff.
The mat, and it ripped off part of my backer. So I'm gonna go ahead and say this is a fail of a product, and no wonder it was on clearance.
So instead I went back to my Dollar Tree contact paper. This is what I like to use whenever I'm printing out a stencil on my Cricut because I'm just going to end up throwing it away and I don't want to use expensive vinyl. So I cut out this little paw print and then my dog's name, which is Sarge, because we are turning this little bread box into a dog toy box. So stinking cute. But I've had some people ask me to share my design space process using my Cricut. If anyone else is interested in that, let me know. I'm happy to create that for you guys. I'm not a Cricut affiliate, so I just haven't made a video dedicated to my Cricut design space yet, but I can certainly do that. Just let me know if anyone else is interested in seeing it. Using my makeup sponge, I added 2 thin layers of white chalk paint to my stencil and then used my heat tool to dry it and lifted it off. And how cute. I just love his little name at the bottom right corner of his toy box. For the paw prints, I am placing those on the inside of the lid. So I'm using this a little bit different. I'm having the lid actually be like the top of how the box opens, and you'll see that here in just a minute. So to fill the inside, I decided I wanted to use some fabric to line it with. I had this fabric left over from my bench in my living room. I'll insert a picture of that for you guys to see, but I thought it would be a perfect accent for the inside of his box. And knowing that he's going to be putting his pulling his toys out of it, I'll be putting them back in, but that he'll be pulling them out of it all the time. I wanted something that would hold up and didn't want to just put paint. So I am using some decoupage glue. This is a terrible angle, so I didn't film too much of this part of the project, but you can get the idea. I just decoupaged, Mod Podge, whatever you want to use. I added this fabric down, cut off anything that was extra, and this I think is going to hold up really nicely with some wear and tear from a dog. So here is how it turned out, and I just think this is absolutely adorable. I had been looking for a bread box to make over for a while now, and I'm so happy I found one, but I do have a true bread box in my kitchen, so I wanted to turn it into something else.
Sarge, what's in here? What's in here? Is that your toys? Do you like it? What's in there? Yeah, get your toys. Which one are you gonna pick? Oh, one on the bottom. What'd you pick? The raccoon? You got your raccoon? Hard to film. Tug of war, huh? Yeah. It's hard to film.
He is just so handsome.
I found this oval mirror at a garage sale or the Goodwill bins last summer. It was less than $5, and the frame on this mirror is just beautiful. I love the detail and had this grand vision of what I wanted to do with this piece. Well, it went a little awry, so let me walk you through this. I removed the staples holding the backer and the mirror in place. So my plan was to age or antique a portion of this mirror. There's a hard coating on top of the mirror to protect it, and in order to age the mirror itself, you need to remove this coating. I have found that this citrus strip is the best method in removing the back of the mirror surface. I use a cheap paintbrush to spread it on and make sure to add a generous coat of the citrus strip.
The bottle says to let it sit for at least 30 minutes. That was not quite long enough. The coating was not coming off as easy as it should, so I let it sit for another 30 minutes and that was perfect. This is what you want to see when you know the paint is ready to scrape off. It will look all rippled and bubbled up, and I used my Cricut scraper because I couldn't find my plastic scraper, but you do not want to use a metal scraper. That could scratch the mirror surface, which will show through on the front. Next, I'm going to start the antiquing process, and in a spray bottle, I mixed together bleach and water. I did about 1 part bleach to 3 parts water and start spraying small sections of the mirror. This is still the back of the mirror where I removed the hard coating, and then let that bleach water sit on the surface for a few minutes, and then dab it off with a paper towel. This process requires a lot of patience. You want to gradually remove the mirror to make sure it turns out how you want. You can always remove more, but you cannot put it back. Here you can see how the mirror is being removed wherever that bleach water was sitting. So this is where I ran into an issue, and not because I wasn't being patient. I knew this was going to happen, where I didn't like a section of it and I tried to fix it and then I overcorrect it and then overdo it and then it's too much. This is such such a difficult process for me being a perfectionist, because I have a vision of exactly how I want it to look, and distressing and making something look aged isn't something you can exactly perfect, or you can't get like an identical look every time you do something. So what I need to do now is take all of the mirror surface off and get it down to the bare original glass. And I have mirror spray paint, so I can still get that reflective original mirror surface back, and that way, hopefully, I can control it a little bit better and make the areas that I want to be mirror and the areas that I don't want there to be mirror to come through a little bit better for how I was envisioning. I wanted a design to be peeking through the aged part of the mirror, and I thought this floral napkin was perfect. So since I removed all of the mirror surface, I figured out what parts of the napkin I want to show through. And then using a small paintbrush dipped in water, I outlined the sections that I want. This helps to easily rip the napkin right exactly where you want it. And then I placed the glass back on top of the napkin and drew a line with a chalk marker where the napkin edges are. That way I can tape off this section and not get the mirror spray paint on it. The directions on this spray paint say to shake it for 2 minutes really well and then spray 5 individual coats of paint, waiting 1 minute in between. I went over all of the edges where my tape is with a damp paper towel to give a faded look so it wouldn't have that harsh line when I take the tape off. And I repeated this with each coat of spray paint. Now, I'll admit I'm not a huge fan of the way this spray paint turned out. However, it does add to the overall vintage look that I'm going for with this project. The mirror surface is a little more speckled and blurry looking, not as clear and reflective as a traditional mirror would be. To add to the aged look even more, I'm taking this bronze patina paint by Dixie Belle and dabbed it around the edges where there is no mirror. And then to add the napkin, I used a thin layer of Mod Podge only over top of the napkin, not underneath, to decoupage the napkin down. I didn't want it to distort the napkin look from the front and be able to see that Mod Podge. Has anyone ever tried the DIY paint liquid patina as a decoupage medium? Let me know down in the comments what you think about it. I have heard it is much nicer to work with than Mod Podge, and I really want to give it a try. When the Mod Podge dried, I took sandpaper to the edges to tear off any of the excess napkin. For the frame, I sanded it down so the paint would stick better and gave it a coat of Slick Stick and then 2 coats of Rust-Oleum chalk paint in linen white. I wanted the frame to tie into the mirror, so I took the bronze paint again and added it to the raised section bordering that twist detail. Then to distress this area, I took a chippy brush with my white paint to go over the bronze, and I used a very, very tiny bit of paint on my brush to do this. I did the same thing with the bronze paint and dry brushed it over the twist detail. I think this looks so beautiful and ties the two pieces together. I don't like a lot of distressing, but I thought this piece needed it, so I took some sandpaper and very lightly distressed the outside frame detail, so this part didn't look too new, and distressing is such a personal preference. If you like a heavy distress, by all means take off even more paint. So after looking at the mirror for several days, I really was not happy with how it turned out and headed back to the thrift store to find a new one. I did the same process in removing the hard coating and antiqued the mirror. This time I added about half and half bleach to water, and that helped remove the mirror a little quicker. This one was turning out much better. Once I was happy with the mirror, I Mod Podged the napkin down, and instead of using bronze on the frame, for this one I used burlap, also by Dixie Belle. I'm so glad that I went back and recreated this project because the second one is exactly what I was envisioning with the spotted, distressed look. Here's how the first one turned out. I don't hate it, but I also don't love it. I much prefer the second version. Next up, this project took me a really long time to create, and I had a few ideas on how I could have made it easier in case you want to recreate this. I'm taking this tomato garden stake, and I think this is where I went wrong. I'm making a woven basket, and because this has the circle rings to hold the shape, I had to cut each row of twine and add them individually. If I was recreating this, I would add sturdy wire like this 16 gauge rebar around a circle base. That way you can continue looping the twine around continuously. Lessons learned. But I wanted more than just the 3 vertical points that the tomato stake had, so I added 15 more using the rebar wire and my favorite Starbond super glue to secure them in place. Next, I'm taking some jute twine and adding it on top of all the vertical wires to cover them up. I found this massive spool of twine at one of my local thrift stores, such a great find, and I left some twine longer at the bottoms so I can curl them under. Once I have all of the wires covered, I'm going to start weaving the basket. Like I said earlier, because of the metal rings, I had to cut each strand of twine individually, which made this project take hours longer than it needed to. So I chose one section that I wanted to be the back and made sure I started and ended each piece in the same spot to be the back. This bottom section is going to have a basic weave pattern going over, under, over, under, over, under each wire, and the next strand right on top of that going under, over, and I added 8 rows like this. Next, I'm going to leave a little gap and then add 2 rows of twine going in the same pattern over, under, and continue up the basket, leaving space between each row on this section. I wish I had put the rows a little bit closer together for this bottom portion. I did 6 rows like this and then decided I didn't like the look of just one vertical twine per section, so I went back and added a second right next to it. I think this looks much better with the doubled up rows I just added. Then I went back to the single alternating rows close together and added 9 rows like this and repeated the pattern all the way up the basket. After the next section, I wanted the top to start tapering in, so I took my wire cutters and cut off that remaining top metal ring. This was pretty difficult since I have no hand strength, but once I got it off, I bent the wires inward, creating that tapered look and continued weaving in the twine. Finally, when I got close to the top, I bent the wires straight up to create the mouth of the basket and added the remaining twine section. To finish the top, I bent the wires all the way in and hot glued the top 2 rows in place. To clean up the hot glue strings all over the twine, I took my heat gun to the basket and melted them in, and then I took a lighter to the whole thing. This part I was a little bit nervous about since it was such a large piece. A few parts did catch on fire, but I quickly put them out and it was fine. I wish I would have left the basket in this natural twine, but the Anthropologie versions were painted or they had used colored wicker. Either way, I ended up spray painting the basket black, but I didn't like how the black looked at all. It was way too dark. You couldn't see any of the basket detail. So I went back over it in the color Smoky Beige. Walmart has been sold out of all their spray paints for months, but when I was looking for colors for this video, they were fully stocked. If your stores have been sold out recently, check back and see if they're in stock now. They had so many great neutral colors this past week. Let me know what you think about this one. My version cost about $25 with the thrifted twine, wire, and spray paint, compared to Anthropologie at $158 for the large version, which is 24 inches, and mine came in at 23 1/4, so very close. This was a very time-consuming project because I had to keep cutting the twine. I think it took me about 8 hours to complete. I would like to try another basket where I can use one continuous piece in a future video.
I found these candlesticks at a thrift store a few months ago and shared them in a haul. Today, I'm finally bringing you my vision for them. They were originally from Kohl's, $25 a piece. I got the set for $15 and loved the shape. I started out giving them both a scuff sand and 2 coats of black chalk paint. Next, I'm taking this Magnolia transfer again and cut out one of the floral pieces that I thought would wrap nicely around the wood. Since there's so much detail and grooves on the candlesticks, I thought it would be easier to cut the transfer into smaller sections rather than trying to maneuver the whole thing around the contours. Even with cutting the transfer up, I struggled to get this on. You could see a lot of wrinkles and missing pieces all throughout. I think I should have put a top coat down first and then applied the transfer. So for the second candlestick, I thought I would try the Dollar Tree transfers on it. Since we're going for a modern look, these gold floral transfers will look stunning wrapped around the surface. However, these transfers were just as difficult to add. There's a big difference in quality here between the two. The Dollar Tree transfers will instantly stick and rub off on any surface they come in contact with, where the Dixie Belle transfers, you really have to rub them. The gold transfers are also not perfect, but I think this version looks so elegant. Which one do you prefer? I have been looking for a roll top bread box at the thrift store for probably a year and finally found one. It reminds me of my grandmother's house when I was little, and I know this one is not old. It definitely looks newer, but I was still excited to find it. After I cleaned the inside and out, I taped off the inside and the roll top. I'm gonna paint the outside in plaster by Waverly, but want to leave the roll top in the wood tone. I gave the box 3 coats of paint, and then I'm taking 400 grit sandpaper to smooth out any of the brush strokes and sand the edges down a little bit to let the wood come through. I don't like a lot of distressing, but if you do, you can always sand it down even more. I found this beautiful vintage style napkin from Amazon, and I can link it in my description box. I thought it would be perfect on the sides of this bread box. At first, I was only going to use a portion of the napkin in the center of the sides, so I wet a paintbrush and outlined the section I wanted to add. I love this technique because the edges fade right into the object and look like it was always meant to be there. To attach the napkin onto my box, I'm using DIY liquid patina. This is my new favorite decoupage medium. It is a thin consistency and dries quickly. I really enjoy this over Mod Podge.
But I started by adding a small section of the patina and then add my napkin and work my way down since it dries quicker. After the middle piece was laid down, I was trying to think how I could make it blend into the rest of the side, and I didn't want this to lean farmhouse. That's not my style, but all I could think of was making the edges dark with antique wax and distressing it. So instead, I ended up taking more pieces of the napkin and filling it in so the entire side was covered, and I'm really glad that I went that direction. When the liquid patina was dry, I took my sandpaper again to the edges to clean them up. The sides felt like there was something missing, so I got out my olive crest mold from IOD, and using this little corner filigree piece, I dusted it with cornstarch and then added in my air dry clay. I made 4 of these pieces to put 2 on the bottom corners of each side. When they dried, I painted them in a light tan color and attached them to the sides using my Starbond super glue. Last for this piece, I wanted to change out the knob and make it feel a little bit more vintage. My mom found this bag of vintage drawer pulls while we were on vacation a few weeks ago that were perfect, so I swapped the wood pull out for a vintage one, and that's it for this one. Next, I have this wood round that I found at a local thrift store. I did get it for half off of that sticker price, but I'm always keeping my eye out for any type of wood rounds or wood pieces at the thrift store that I can turn into risers. I had this exact same wood round in another project. I will link that up in the cards and in my description box if you haven't seen that riser that I created. But I'm also always wanting to find things that I can turn into trays as well. So that is what we're doing here. And once I gave it a good sanding, I'm taking this white wash stain over top of it because this wood has a very red undertone, and that's not what I'm going for. I wanted to give this more of that trendy bleached wood look. So after I gave it the whitewash, I did let that dry for 24 hours. And then here is, you can see how it looks once it is dried. So it's just going to neutralize that red tone. If you ever have a piece that you don't like the tone of the wood, just give it a whitewash before you go in with your next color of stain. I chose not to go in with stain for this next part because I really love the color of my Waverly Fawn chalk paint, and I watered it down so that it would kind of act as a stain would. And then I'm just going to paint this over top of my entire wood round. Once I have the entire wood round covered with the paint water mixture or watered down paint mixture, I'm going to take a paper towel and wipe off the excess just like you would do with any type of stain. And next for the metal portion, I found this piece also at a garage sale, the same garage sale I got that first floral metal piece from. I think this is something you put on your table to put a hot plate on or a hot pan on so that it doesn't burn your surface, but I thought it would be a perfect riser or tray, and I just popped that wood round in the center. It fit perfectly, and here is how it turned out. Once that paint dried, that watered down paint dried, it really gives that bleached wood look, and it is so on trend right now. I just love it. Let me know how you like to transform your thrifted or garage sale finds to give them just an easy updated look. That's all I got for you today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.